Hello there and welcome. This is a special edition of Africa News Hour on the released DAPCHI schoolgirls. I'm Ni Uilo. Now, 76 of the 110 girls kidnapped from a boarding school in DAPCHI, Yobe State by Boko Haram have been released. Eyewitnesses account reports that the girls were returned by the insurgents in 9 vehicles, same way they were carted away. The government girls' science and technical college students were kidnapped during the evening of February 19th. Details of their whereabouts had been shrouded in mystery, but according to the government, 76 of the girls have been released, and work is ongoing to release the remaining girls. For more, let's go to Arise, a special correspondent Charles Aniagolu, who joins me live on the phone. Good to have you with us, Charles. All right, hopefully we'll get Charles Aniagolu, our correspondent in DAPCHI, to give us more update on the developments there. Now, for more on this development story, joining me in the studio is the Executive Director of this state newspaper, Emmanuel Feni, and African Affairs Analyst, Bala Zakas. Good to have you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to start with you, Bala. Have we learned our lesson from this scenario?
Well, generally, when there are events, the only thing that will help somebody to make improvement and to move forward is by lessons learned. And when you talk about lessons learned, it simply means something has happened, you've discovered lacunas or stop gaps, and there is a need to avoid them in future. So if you look at what happened with the DAPCHI abduction and you put it side by side with the Chibok, it will look as if somehow, somewhere, certain things were left unattended. But the good thing is Nigerians are not relenting. We are determined to secure our borders. We are determined to secure our country. And we are determined to make sure whatever it will take, Nigeria is taken care of. And we rid this country of miscreants, whether you call them disgruntled elements or terrorists or whatever.
Very good. Now, Emmanuel, could this have been prevented going by the Chibok experience?
Yes, in fact, first, we are happy that the girls, majority of them are back. And whatever effort we need to put in to bring back not just the remaining DAPCHI girls who are still in captivity, but also the Chibok girls, many of whom are still in captivity. All efforts must be geared towards bringing that. Of course, it is bad enough that it happened again. After April 2014, when the Chibok girls were kidnapped and abducted by these insurgents, one would have expected that all schools, especially in the Northeast, were secured. Of course, we had this Safe School initiative, which we thought were in place. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and this happened.
A lot of money was committed to that
as
cause.
Much as $10 million committed to that project. Unfortunately, that project was not followed up, and this happened. But going forward, all efforts must be put in place to ensure that all schools around that Northeast, both Yobe, Borno, they are well secured. Not just with fencing, but the fact that these students are moved to where we have proper security cordon around the area to ensure that this insurgents, because it's becoming part of their game to now adopt, ask for ransom, go back, get more weapons, continue the insurgency. We must not allow this to continue.
All right, very good, Emmanuel. We have Charles Aniagolu, our correspondent in DAPCHI, and he's joined us live to give us more updates. Good to have you again, Charles. Now, what more can you tell us? It's been like 2-3 hours since we heard of the release of the girls. So what more do you have for us?
Well, basically, the story has moved on from DAPCHI. We're actually on our way en route to Maiduguri. We're in Damaturu at the moment, the Yobe state capital, And the girls are imminently being moved from DAPCHI and the surrounding villages, because don't forget that although they were from the secondary school in DAPCHI, they're not all from DAPCHI. So the ones that have been released, what we've seen is a convoy of military vehicles and buses and so on that are going to transport them from DAPCHI and the surrounding and sort of villages to Damaturu, the capital, and probably on to Maiduguri to fly to meet the president later on. Now, we don't know exactly when that will happen, but what the point really is that the story has moved on from DAPCHI now. As I said, the girls are being transported away from there. But of course, earlier today we were in DAPCHI from start to finish. We were there when soldiers closed off the route to allow Boko Haram to move, to come, to allow Boko Haram to come and actually drop the girls off. And we could see them. I mean, we saw the convoy of Boko Haram with all their sort of armed militants and so on from a distance, and it caused absolute, I mean, fear around the area. All the villagers who were in the path of those Boko Haram vehicles ran away. But, happy to say that it ended in a good way. There were no incidents. The army cleared the way, allowed Boko Haram to go into the villages and drop off these girls. We even have some still pictures taken by the villagers showing them waving to Boko Haram in their village. So they were that close to us. So extraordinary developments today, and it's absolutely brilliant that Arise News was there to witness it, Nee.
Very good, Charles. Now, any word from the state governments and the federal government on the release of the girls so far?
Well, I think the Minister of Information has been speaking, or certainly put out a statement, congratulating the army and saying that this has happened, today's release has happened without incident, because of course there was no bloodshed, there wasn't a single shot fired, and in spite of the fact that the military were on the sort of the path of Boko Haram, or in their path, in a pretty sort of strong show of force, there was no altercation. So to that extent, the army also have to be congratulated for their restraint and for allowing this operation to go smoothly. So that's the statement that we've seen. You have to remember that DAPCHI is a very remote, very sleepy village, and it doesn't have any internet connection. And most phone signals were simply not working in that area. I mean, this is the first time I'm getting a phone signal. We had to use the phone signal of one of our colleagues here who had multiple lines. So it's the information is slowly trickling out, and we're just in Damaturu now and now getting the government response. But I expect that by this evening there'll be a torrent of reaction from both the state government, the federal government, and the opposition.
Very good, Charles. And right now we can see visuals. These are current visuals of just coming in. We can see some of the girls being lined up, and as a bevy of press, media, they're surrounded by people and well-wishers and all that. But you've gone round. Were you able to meet the parents? Have they actually talked to you? Any comments from them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we were, of course, in DAPCHI and a village next to DAPCHI where some of the girls were released. We talked to the parents. They were absolutely, ecstatic. There were jubilant scenes across the village. I mean, people shouting, people yelling, people waving their fists and saying "Sai Buhari," and speculation, of course, that that suggests that Mr. Buhari's started his presidential campaign, re-election campaign, rather positively. But I mean, yes, there were, but of course there was also a dark cloud. There was some sadness because, from what we understand, some of the girls are dead. They died as they were being sort of abducted by Boko Haram, suffocated. And we met the parents of one of the girls who was clearly in a very somber mood amidst all the jubilation.
Very good, Charles. Now, what more do we know about the circumstances of their release? I know you said there was a lot of negotiations in that regard. So what actually happened?
Well, as you well know, in Nigeria, there is, usually enormous reticence in disclosing exactly what happened. What we know, though, is that before this happened, this release today, President Buhari made it ineluctably clear that he was going to negotiate with Boko Haram, that he did not want to lose a single hair on the girls, and that it was much better to ensure that they were all released alive rather than take the military option and have some sort of confrontation that could lead to, fatalities. So to that extent, I mean, he's done what he said he was going to do. He's got them released, and that there is a sense that it's been a pretty successful run. I mean, the speculation, of course, continues to grow that clearly the government paid some sort of ransom. I mean, we don't know what amount it would have been, but I mean, I suspect it would have been considerable. I mean, and the fear, of course, is that Boko Haram are going to pop up somewhere else and do exactly the same thing.
Now, we understand there were like 5 fatalities from the girls. Can you confirm that 5 of the girls actually died?
Well, I just literally did. But I mean, the fact, of course, is that I don't know what perhaps you may not be sort of hearing me quite as lucidly, but yes, we were in a village and we met the parent of one of the girls who died. And he was obviously deeply saddened, in a fairly morose state, because, of course, all around him there was considerable jubilation. But if you looked to one section of the village, there were sort of elders and friends, I suppose, relatives sitting next to him, who were clearly in mourning. And, even the girls themselves, the ones that we were able to film and the ones that were sort of available to sort of the press, some of them were weeping, and I think they felt the loss of their friends. So it is a fairly sort of dark cloud hanging over what would normally be a pretty joyous day.
Now, in terms of security, where you are at the moment, what's it like?
That's a very good question, because what has happened is that, astonishingly, after Boko Haram delivered these girls, because you've got to remember that DAPCHI didn't have any security, which is how Boko Haram were able to come in and take the girls away. But then immediately after that, this town was garrisoned by an enormous sort of police and military presence. And the villagers, as we were talking to them yesterday, nobody, of course, knew that the story would change dramatically today. But as we talked to them yesterday, they said that they were very angry and saying that what's the point of having soldiers here? I mean, we needed them to protect us, but now they've taken our girls away and then the soldiers arrive. But what then happened subsequently today was that I mean, we couldn't actually pass. We were almost stopped from going back to Damaturu yesterday because of the enormous security presence. But after the girls were released, driving back to Damaturu now and onwards to Maiduguri, very, very few. Most checkpoints unmanned. So it looks like the mood of, I suppose, jubilation has also caught the military, and I think there is a sense that perhaps they can now do some sort of business with Boko Haram. That may be dangerous, but that appears to be the fact. And clearly the roads the military presence has dramatically reduced since these developments this morning.
You said you were on your way to Maiduguri, so what should we be expecting there?
Well, really for us, because obviously, as you know, you're on television, we're a television news organization, and we've got to get signals in order to be able to send pictures to you. As I said, the story's pretty much moved on from DAPCHI. The girls are being moved from there towards Damaturu, and Damaturu doesn't have an airport. They're going to be moved probably, unless they're transported by helicopter, we can't confirm that yet, but they're going to be moved probably to Maiduguri, where they're going to board a flight, possibly a presidential jet, to meet President Buhari. So we're going to go on to Maiduguri, try and put together a package if possible. It's going to be unlikely because, again, the signals are not going to be able to take a very big sort of video package, but we're preparing to return to Abuja tomorrow.
Aniogolu, Arise correspondent, would like to thank you for your update, and hopefully we'll get more from you. We want you to stay on that story. We'll be expecting more on that. Good to have you back, and still talking about the release of the DAPCHI schoolgirls. I still have with us on the show Emmanuel Feni and Zaka Bala. And Zaka, I would like your thoughts on what our correspondent just said in regard to, security matters and what it's like generally. What do you think about it?
I think, first of all, what has happened is worthy of praise and appreciation. We have some of our girls back, though some are still in captivity. But this is the way I want to approach it. As far as I'm concerned, we are not talking about terrorism this time around. I think we are dealing with disgruntled elements. Before now, when we're talking about the real Boko Haram, we were talking about terrorists. As far as I'm concerned, there is a major difference between disgruntled elements and terrorists. Terrorists are people that have no respect for a country. They are disloyal citizens.
Or mercenaries?
They don't respect the constitution of a country.
All right.
The approach of terrorists is to adopt the weapon of propaganda, indoctrination, and radicalism. The intention of terrorists is to render a country lawless, to render a government irrelevant, powerless, and then move in and impose or ingrain their ideology. But when you're dealing with disgruntled elements have concerns, and they will want the concerns probably addressed. Disgruntled elements' concerns can be monetary, can be social, and can be political. In this case of the DAPCHI, based on what has just happened now, I see it more as a case of disgruntled elements.
All right. Now, Emmanuel, you have a situation whereby sometimes you need to be fair on the government itself. Seems to be fighting on all fronts. First, it's the herdsman crisis, and now kidnappings, soft targets, attack on soft targets by Boko Haram. Would you say the security forces are a little bit overwhelmed? But you have a confined space of the Northeast where all of this is happening, and yet we're not getting it right. So,
well, it's possible to argue that the military is being stretched thin, and they have actually made this complaint that they are being stretched thin, especially with the situation in the Northeast. Now they are being drafted to assist in curbing the herdsmen.
All right, Emmanuel, I'm so sorry I have to cut in, but we're going to go back to that question. Let's go live again now to DAPCHI, where the father of two of the DAPCHI schoolgirls, Modu Goniri, joins me on the line. It's good to have you with us. Now, you must have a feeling of elation at the moment. How are you feeling?
Yes, we're heading to Damaturu. In the DAPCHI, they did the preliminary test about the girls. So now we are going to Damaturu.
What has been the reception like? Seeing your children. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, I see them. I am the one that took them from one of the neighbor house to the clinic. So around 7:57 a.m. with 9 bags.
How were you told your child has been freed by Boko Haram?
Yes, the Boko Boko Haram, they are the one that you know.
How did you get the information that your child was among those rescued?
Yes, of course. Of course.
What's the next line of action from your end? What are you doing right now?
Well, right now we are escorting them to Damaturu together with the military.
What's going to happen in Damaturu?
When we reach there, I know whether they'll take him to Abuja or they will unite with us.
Expecting a reception from the government, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Very good. That was one of the parents of the freed DAPCHI girls. Now, let's go back to the questions, Emmanuel, regarding what we're talking about, the overwhelming situation security-wise.
Yes, that soldiers have been drafted to various parts of where you have these herdsmen attacking farmers. Of course, is bound to stretch the army. But be that as it may, the situation in the Northeast is something that the country is taking very serious action about all this while, because, you know, it's been on for almost a number of years now. Yes. So the army has their presence there, and they are taking every step to ensure that they curtail this. Don't forget that they have reduced the capacity of the insurgents to hold down territories. Although we are being told that they are still in some local government, 1 or 2 local government in Yobe. And as you can see, the way they were able to take these girls, they were able to keep them within the country. And of course, one House of Representative member, Godni Abubakar, who is representing Busari, Yenusai, and Gandam federal constituency, did say that he knew where these girls were being kept, somewhere in Borno, where in fact, he used the word Boko town, that they are in certain areas. So the army, I'm sure they know where these guys still have strong presence. They are keeping a tab on them. But what must be done, like we have said, is to curtail them in such a way that they don't have access to soft targets, because they cannot carry out the kind of fighting they've been doing with the military. And
also to add to that, if you remember, they said the military presence had moved about a week before the abduction. So that would give credence to what you just said.
Yes, of course, you know, there was this back and forth between the army and the police, that the army pulled out without telling the police. The army said, well, they moved to other areas where the attention was needed more, because they felt the DAPCHI vicinity was relatively safe. But of course, I think this is one of the lessons they must learn, that indeed the area they thought is safe must also have presence, serious security presence, to ensure that they don't go about looking for those areas where they have pulled out. Because these insurgents, they are what they are. Terrorists who want to cause mayhem. And with incidents like this, they remain in the limelight for the propaganda value of this kind of kidnap.
Very good, Emmanuel. Now, Zaka, now earlier on, you were talking about disgruntled elements within the ranks of Boko. And not too long ago, I was reading something about the breakup within Boko Haram itself.
Exactly.
The Shekau faction and the El Barawi.
Yes.
And their so-called allegiance to, you know, the ISIS, you know, the international ISIS and all that. So when you have that kind of situation on ground, one would have thought the security forces would be able to mount a counter-insurgency, you know, move against these weakened insurgencies. And just like Emmanuel said, their ability to hold territory has been whittled down.
Correct.
But then again, they still hold sway. There lies in the question: is it about being cautious all the time on the part of the army or the security forces as well? So,
well, from the security point of analysis, I mean, it was very clear that our security men or security agencies or agents wanted to be very careful about what we best describe as collateral damage. We saw it during the time of the real Chibok girls and the serious damage it caused. But one thing that has been very clear or has been established for quite some time now is that there is a break. There are factions now, and principally we know of two factions, the Shekau's faction and the Al-Barnawi's faction. The Shekau's faction is uncompromising and is very, very lethal. Then the Al-Barnawi's faction appears to be a faction that is willing to negotiate, but also we are trying to see signs of blackmail. And that was why I said I can best describe this now as more of disgruntled elements, while the other ones can best be described as terrorists. Because if the Shekau's faction comes, they are ready to destroy anything on their part. They are very, very brutal. But for the Al-Barnawi, somehow, somewhere, we also saw the release of the University of Maiduguri lecturers and geologists. You can't see that on the side of Shekau.
All right, Bala, I'm going to come back to you, but we have another parent, Adamu Gashuma, who is joining us live on the program. Adamu, another parent of the DAPCHI schoolgirl. Adamu, can you hear us? Okay, Adamu, what can you tell us about the release of your child?
First of all, I will thank the Almighty Allah who makes this thing to be possible. Then my second thank goes to the federal government of Nigeria and the international community, including the youth journalists. We thank all for you for your concern to see that our daughters were released.
All right, go on, Adamu. We can hear you.
Yes, this is my first thank.
The situation, it's a happy mood for everyone. Okay, so what is the next step? We understand you're going to Maiduguri.
Yes, they are now taken to Maiduguri.
Have you been able to speak with your daughter?
Yes, I make first four eyes with her this morning before they left to Maiduguri.
Did she tell you? Can you share that with us?
What?
What did she tell you, your daughter?
So by that time she cannot be able to talk because she was angry. So she cannot be able to talk and just some sign of this hungry. So she cannot be able to talk well.
Okay, understandably so. Now, what has the government said, to you relating to all of this? What have you heard from the government relating to all of this?
Well, what I heard from the government?
Yes. What have they told you on the release of your daughter?
Up to now, we did not have anything from the government as of now.
Adamu Gashuma would like to thank you for your thoughts. And, it's a happy moment for everyone. We'd like to thank you for being a part of the program. Now, back to what we were saying. So, what do you make of the development?
Well, fortunately, I school in that flank of the country, and I have a lot of schoolmates, primary schoolmates and secondary schoolmates who incidentally are also parents. I knew about this release probably much earlier today. But like I said, we are now dealing with a faction that if care is not taken, Nigeria and Nigerians will be blackmailed.
All right.
And we need to do something about that. Because whichever way you look at it, there is insecurity. And one thing about security is this: if you don't tackle insecurity, right, you will throw your country into a risk. And what is a risk? A risk is the chances of threats in cases like this, or terrorism, taking advantage of your vulnerabilities, to cause you harm. What could be the vulnerabilities? Maybe the stretched security agencies, the lack of defensing of the schools, or inability to take care of our citizens, and they became vulnerable tools to miscreants like that. But when these threats take advantage of your vulnerabilities, they cause you serious harm. They will cause you political harm. They will cause you social harm, and they will cause you economic harm. Because as we speak now, Nigeria is being beamed as a country that is probably lawless and cannot take care of securities.
So it has far-reaching negative...
Seriously.
All right.
Whether they are mild or they are brutish.
Okay. All right. Now, we've just gotten word now that the number of released girls has risen from 76 to 111. So we just... 101 rather. 101. That has been confirmed. 101. From 76 to 101. We just got that. Okay. Now, Emmanuel, based on that, would you say the negotiations has been quite successful and has exceeded expectations?
Well, the fruit of the negotiation, because President Muhammadu Buhari made it very clear that they are negotiating with these insurgents through third party, and they are not going to explore the military option in order to bring back these girls safe and sound. And we are seeing the result of that, that indeed the negotiation, of course 76 initially, and now we're talking of 101. Perhaps, when these girls were dropped, many of them moved away. So perhaps they are being gathered together to ensure that, of course, we have that number. But if you remove 100 that's 101, there's 9 left, right. 5 dead, exactly. So there's still about 4 to be accounted for. We hope that in the course of time, these other 4 girls will be accounted for, safe and alive.
Hopefully. And now, you have a situation whereby all this is happening. But what is to stop this from happening again?
Well, it's orientation. First of all, the recovered ones must go through what I can describe as psychoanalysis, psycho-cleansing, and psycho-orientation. And
just to, if you saw the visuals, you could see how, emaciated and...
Correct.
Yeah, and how affected those...
And that's why you are not going to take a conventional way of rehabilitating them. First of all, in psychoanalysis, you ask yourself, how does a disgruntled element or a criminal or a terrorist think? They must have ingrained certain things in these traumatized children. So you must psychoanalyze that. Then you psycho-cleanse them. Because with counseling, it's not just sit down, don't do this. So when you psycho-cleanse them, then you psycho-orient them before integrating them into the wider society. And then the next thing we need to do is to begin to now segment the demography of Nigeria. Because that flank of the country somehow is socially bastardized. The next thing we need to ask ourselves is this: what generation and age bracket of Nigerians in that flank of the country can we rescue? Maybe those who are in their 30s and 40s that have been in the captivity of Boko Haram are already people that we may not be able to clean up. But can we now check those who are between the age range, of say 15 and 25? What can we ingrain in them? I learned that these days there are subjects they call civic education. What is the curriculum? We must save and recover this generation. We can also say maybe those between the ages of 5 and say 15. This is the kind of orientation they will need to have about their country. So that everything about them and their allegiance should be about their country. Then from 15 to probably 25, when you now have real teenagers getting to the adulthood, what should the orientation be? So when we segment that and we start, it's a generational cleansing. So probably in the next 20 or 30 years, we are likely to have a new generation of Nigerians that will think Nigeria and will be focused about Nigerians.
Very good. Now, there have been instances whereby you have incidences like this, and people say, oh, it's been politicized and not much has been done in that regards. Is that where we should be focusing on right now, beyond the realm of politics, okay? These are parents' children, and it could be any one of us. So
correct.
What do you make of this development?
Well, there's no need playing politics with what has just happened, and it applies to all sides. It's no use trying to use them as trophy to say, oh, this president did better than the other. This is not the time for that. And of course, the opposition must also guide themselves, not to also want to unduly exploit the fact that there is success here, try to oppose it. No, it's good that these children were brought back after negotiation. Yes, it was bad enough that it happened at all. Having had similar incident in 2014, but now that the girls are back, it's not what we should be playing politics with, whether the ruling party or the opposition party. So I think, yes, the girls will be welcomed by the president, of course, to assure them that indeed the country thought about them while they were in captivity, reassure them that everything will be done to bring them back to their normal psychological state. Of course, like you mentioned, my colleague mentioned here, we need to really reorientate these girls. But thank God they said, at least some of the girls interviewed in some of the reports online right now, that they were not badly treated. Of course, they will have been starved. As you see, some of them looked famished.
Yes, famished. Yeah. Very good thoughts on you both. Now, let's go live now to former Commissioner of Police, Frank Odiai, to be part of this conversation. Mr. Odiai, it's good to have you with us. Now, what should be the government's focus in fortifying schools in regions still open to insurgency? Mr. Odiai, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, very good. Now, I asked, what should be the government's focus in fortifying schools in regions still open to insurgency?
I didn't hear that.
All right. What should be the government's focus in fortifying these schools where insurgency is rife?
Well, I have said that many times over. I have said that it is now time for us to upgrade the security system in schools. The schools should have, first and foremost, fenced round for perimeter security, then have gates, exits, and inlets, and then have some equipment that will detect arms or metals, and keep some trained men in the place and guide them in the security of young people. And it is important that it should be part of our educational system.
All right, Mr. Odiai, where does community policing come into this? Okay, it's not as if Boko Haram is living outside of the country, they're within the community. How should we proceed from here?
Well, there is always what they call a division of labor. The external aggression is managed by the military, while the internal security is managed by the police, if the police have the wherewithal to cope with it. And they can be able to train local vigilantes to handle certain security situation within their areas of authority. Well adequately supervised by the police, well managed, and of course, motivated to do that too, without having to get involved in corrupt practices.
All right, Mr. Frank Odiai, retired Commissioner of Police, would like to thank you for your contributions to this special edition of the program. Back to you, Bala. You've heard what he said. Are you in agreement?
Well, to some extent, but not completely. Okay. What needs to happen is we must be our brothers or our sisters' keepers. You cannot fence everywhere. We cannot fence the entire country just because people are smuggling petroleum products. The question is this: what is the orientation within us? What is our national philosophy? Should our national philosophy be that I should care for you as my fellow brother? The area I am in congruency with him is neighborhood watch. When you see strange faces, because like you rightly said, the people we are talking about now, these disgruntled elements or the terrorists, they are within the geographical sovereignty or entity called Nigeria. How can we be living with such characters? How can we be living with such marauders and blood-sucking vampires? What will happen to the generation to come in future? And that was why we said we must segment this generation, begin to inculcate ingrained national philosophy in them, loyalty to the country. Because like we said, we are dealing initially with people that have no respect for your constitution. Their intention is to render our country lawless.
Very good, Bala. Now, in view of what you just said, what should be the role of the governors? Because sometimes you can't help but notice that they are like powerless when these things occur, and it's right within their jurisdiction. So what role should they play?
In fact, when Frank Odita mentioned the issue of neighborhood watch, what came to my mind was, could this be the first step to state police? Because the governors are closer to the people, yet they don't have authority to instruct the police. The police must take orders from the headquarters, from the federal government, from the Inspector General of Police.
So the long line of bureaucracy.
So I think it's about time that this idea of state police, because this neighborhood watch, they can now be part of the community policing, which will ensure that there's better intelligence gathering before things happen within the neighborhood. They can report to the neighborhood watch, who perhaps will report to the immediate community police. And of course, that line of transmission will get to the governor, who can immediately give instruction. But as it is now, some of this instruction will go to Abuja first. And before it makes its round back, things have taken a different turn. So I think the issue of state police must be given thought. A lot of stakeholders are now on board. The legislators, recall that the state legislators recently also came up with this idea that there should be state police. And with time, because we need to police the entire country, and one national police force cannot do it alone.
Yes. We can see the pitfalls and the challenges they have in it. It's also obvious. Now, in relation to what Emmanuel just said, critics have argued that the state police think that Nigeria is not politically matured to go into it. As you have in the United States, you have the county police, you have the state police, and of course you have the FBI, the CIA, and of course all these federal units to converge on situations and help out. They do that every now and then. But in terms of Nigeria, are we that politically matured to go into this?
I think over time it's been established that in Nigeria we abuse discretionary powers.
And I'm sorry, there's always the issue of witch hunt. That has been the argument, right? You know, governors using it.
Correct.
All right.
An abuse of discretionary powers in every aspect. So somehow, somewhere, there is also a need to educate political leaders. Because when you are given that responsibility, what citizens do or the electorate do basically is they hand over their economic, political, and social destiny into your custody to care for them. So you should always act in national interest. But from what is going on now, we have to be very careful to make sure our government or our country is not blackmailed. Because we must be very careful and make sure we avoid anything that will lead to blackmail. Because if it continues this way, then with time, there will be another angle of thinking that maybe things like this now will lead to well-crafted and syndicated criminality. Because for something like this to happen, and like we said, it is happening within the geographical confinement called Nigeria. Even if you will use satellite images, you should be able to go up into the atmosphere or into somewhere and be able to monitor those criminals. Okay, they have brought drones. Our daughters, right? We are grateful. We know some are still coming. But after now, where will they be heading to? Will they still remain within that geographical confinement called Nigeria? That's a very key question, which are not necessary for this kind of open discussions, but for our security agencies to consider. But something must happen to make sure Nigeria continues to remain the social, economic, and political hub of Africa.
Very good, Bala. Now, if we look at the emergence of Boko Haram itself, it was born out of, according to bookmakers, it was born out of, the need for opposition politics, okay? People didn't think there was going to be an army of youths, disgruntled youths, and use them against perceived opponents in politics. Now, politics played a huge part in the emergence of Boko Haram itself, whether we like it or not. And just like what happened in Kogi regarding the latest killings there, we saw a situation whereby even the government admitted to a large extent that, look, perceived opponents, political opponents, were behind this. Now, the argument here is that, look, perhaps this latest incident, kidnappings here and there, and all these little insurgencies might have something to still do with politics. So do you share that belief?
Well, I think the history of the Boko Haram is well documented. And if we take it from when the leader of the then Boko Haram was killed, died in government custody, and surprisingly, the son of that leader is the Arbanawi, who is whose faction kidnapped these children. But look at their ideology, and that's where I think we should be focusing on.
All right.
They are opposed to Western education. They are targeting schools. Parents will be afraid to send their children to school. Children will be afraid to go to school. So it's like they are winning the psychological war in that sphere. So what I think the government must do is to ensure that schools, children still receive education. Because for children not to receive education, especially in a state or states regarded as educationally disadvantaged already, will be playing into the hands of these insurgents. And of course, like Bala said, we need to win that war to ensure that the children have proper orientation over time. The youth in that area, to recover them from this Boko Haram mentality which they are trying to force on people not to respect their country, to be loyal to this ideology. I think that is where the real challenge is. Ensure that these schools are open. Children still have access to education while we try to recover, like he said, those who have been brainwashed to believe the Boko Haram ideology, to disrespect their country, to feel that these insurgents are more where they should place their loyalty than to their country. Right. So it's a long-drawn psychological affair that we have to go through to reorientate, of course, youths that have been so brainwashed by these insurgents.
Okay, reorientation, education, and of course security. Those are the key factors. Emmanuel Efen, Executive Director this day, I would like to thank you for your thoughts on this program. Zaka Bello, a public affairs analyst, always a pleasure to have you as well. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
This is Africa News R, special coverage of the released DAPCHI girls. Again, let's remind you of the latest update. Arise News has just learned that the number of the released DAPCHI girls has increased from 76 to 101. Government sources say the number can still increase with ongoing documentation of the girls. An eyewitness account reports that the girls were returned by the insurgents in 9 vehicles, the same way they were carted away. The government girls' science and technical college students were kidnapped during the evening of February 19th. Details of their whereabouts had been shrouded in a mystery, but according to the government, 76 of the girls have now been released, and work is ongoing to release the remaining girls. Happy moments there, and rightfully so. Now, in business, the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland has blocked various bank accounts in Switzerland over an alleged oil bribery scheme linked to Nigeria and oil giants Shell and Eni, who are due to stand trial in Milan, Italy on May 14th. The Swiss attorney confiscated assets and provided information and assistance to Italian authorities. Nigerian and Italian courts have accused officials from both companies of improper payments to secure a license for an oil field OPL 245, said to contain over 9 billion barrels of oil. Case over this controversial transaction has lingered for over 6 years since it broke and has involved the courts in Nigeria, Netherlands, UK and Italy with no clear conclusion. Now let's go across to London, where a business analyst has been following this story closely. It's good to have you with us. Now, can you give us an update on this? You have been following this case for over 2 years. What does this development mean?
Well, it means that this case is being taken seriously. We understand 3 separate bank accounts in Lugano, Basel, and Geneva were frozen, and it must also mean that they've been able to track or trace some of these funds of any of the 13 accused persons, which include the CEO of ENI, senior Shell executives, the former Energy Minister Tete, and several advisors and personalities who are related to this incident. So it's an indication that they already see the possibility of an action that may result in these accounts moving off very quickly. And so they're trying to ensure that they are able to at least get everything they can if there should be an action to indict any of the 13 persons that are involved. But it shows that there is seriousness given to this case, and it's going to be a case that will be very, very closely watched.
Now, will the new petroleum industry governance bill make it impossible for future improper deals like this to reoccur?
Well, the new petroleum industry governance bill is a major improvement over the previous act that was in place. But what it really does is that it commercializes the entities, separates the entities in the oil sector into regulator, policy, and the commercial role. And you also have an investment company taking over what NAPIMS used to do. So you have a better separation and commercial grade entities that would be run under the Company and Allied Matters Act, not like parastatals. So there's a lot of enhancement. It also weakens the powers of the minister a lot by strengthening the independence of the regulator. But it's not quite clear the role of the minister in supervising NNPC, whether he will still remain the chairman. That's still subject to perhaps interpretation. But if you look at this case, 2 things were particularly facilitating the problem we saw in Malabo. First, the then head of state, that's Sani Abacha, was able to collaborate with the minister and perhaps the regulators, the DPR and whoever was responsible for finalizing some of this documentation to enable this transaction, which was definitely very, 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 very wrong. Now, this new bill, obviously the president's powers are still very intact and still very strong. It's not clear that he can stop this kind of collaboration. But more importantly, the previous act gives the president discretionary powers to do what he likes with the oil. That's essentially what it does. So it's within the law for the president to award the blocks to whoever he wants under these discretionary powers. In the new governance bill, there is silence on this power of the president. Perhaps it would have been better if it were clearly stated that these powers have been annulled or qualified in a way that would be able to control whatever the president wants to do, or in terms of awards on a discretionary basis. But so far, it is a very good bill. I would say a major departure. It prepares NNPC for commercialization and even privatization. But I'm not quite clear that it stops some of these horrible acts of corruption.
Very good, Bode Oshosami. Many thanks for your thoughts on the Nigerian oil sector. You've been watching Africa News Hour special coverage of the released DAPCHI schoolgirls. Please keep it here on the Rise News from the entire team in Lagos and, of course, London. Goodbye, and thanks for being there.